Hey, I'm Adam Anderson. I am the chairman of Hook Security. On my left is the ever exuberant and handsome Zach Eikenberry, CEO and co-founder of Hook Security. And we want to talk to you a little bit about the difference between threat, risk, and vulnerability. Does that sound like a good idea?
Let's give it a shot.
All right. So I get frustrated sometimes when trying to help people because these three words, threat, risk, and vulnerability, mean distinctly different things. I'm going to give you my quick definition, and then I would love for you to help clarify some of the stuff. So a threat is what an attacker wants to do from wherever they are to you. These are different attack vectors. These are all the different viruses, all the different things. But on the other side of that, there is a bad actor. So a threat is what that person's trying to do. Vulnerability is all the things going on inside of your organization where the threat will actually be able to penetrate and make happen. And then the risk is what is the actual impact to the organization if the threat and vulnerability match up to cause some kind of disruption. So there are three very, very different things. You can be very, very vulnerable and there can be a very high threat, but if the risk is low from them doing anything, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to address your vulnerabilities. Vice versa, you might have a lower vulnerability to a low threat, but if anything happened, the risk is through the roof. So that's my perspective on those three triggers. How does that kind of sit with you?
I like to actually think of this as a chess game, right? So when you exist in the marketplace, your business exists. There are people out there playing an entirely different chess game trying to take you out in some way. And that might mean through some sort of attack and ransomware, malware, all the various ways. You've earned something, you're creating something, there are people who would like to shortcut that, and it's in their best interest to do so.
Sure.
So when you're up against some of these bad guys out there, you're talking about organizations that pay health insurance benefits, right? They're playing a different game of chess. And if you're not aware of their chess game, you're not aware of the threatening moves they're making with their pieces that are attempting to put your queen or king in jeopardy. And if you're not paying attention, you'll create different levels of vulnerability as you make your moves. And then what's at risk is pretty interesting. There is such a thing as relative risk. But at the end of the day, the greatest risk is just 0-1. Do you exist or do you not?
Truth.
And so the absolute risk doesn't change at all. If you do not pay attention to your vulnerabilities and the threats that are coming at them, then your risk is absolute. It is your business no longer exists. You're no longer able to provide for your family to meet your goals or to be able to maintain your work on behalf of others, investors, or stakeholders.
It seems to me, though, the most important thing that you really should be focused on is risk, because risk is where all this thing kind of germinates from. So by focusing on risk above all others, that kind of sets the table on how you should be thinking about vulnerabilities and threats. Because if you really understand your risk, is it fair to say then you are able to ignore a lot of the noise out on the markets and a lot of the fear mongering, because some of this stuff may not apply to you. Yeah, it's a 1-0. I'm either in the game or I'm out of the game, but risk manifests differently for each organization, each company. So when you're thinking about assessing risk, what are some of the things that need to be thought about at a high level? I'm not talking about you need to run through a 17-point NIST cybersecurity framework assessment. I'm talking about from a business point of view. How can we help business people think about risk from a cyber and from a CySec point of view?
That's actually a very interesting question.
That is why I asked it.
Yeah, that's right. So as you judge your risk, you're thinking about what in the future could be true or not true. So all you're doing is scenario planning, and to get rid of the noise is to look at all the various scenarios and say what scenarios are reasonable as a rational actor would play out, and which ones are unreasonable. And then you marry that against what's within your control and what's outside of your control, right? Which is assessing what vulnerabilities are things that you can take on and actually affect, and what vulnerabilities you might always have.
Right.
So your company might always be vulnerable if you're a restaurant to some sort of global shutdown where people are not allowed to eat in your restaurant. That's a vulnerability that you don't have control of it, and it affects very disproportionately your risk profile.
Absolutely right.
But when we're thinking about what can we control and what can we do, the list does become clear. When you think about what are the reasonable scenarios that I'm up against, and in what ways am I vulnerable, and how can I affect those vulnerabilities? Because here's the scary thing, Adam. You cannot control the threats, the number of threats, how many threats are coming at you, the effectiveness of those threats. You can't control a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so as an organization, it doesn't do a lot of good to sit around and think about them.
So threat, vulnerability, and risk. We have no control over a lot of this stuff. So if you don't have control, the thing that you do have control, and this is what I'm hearing you say, is that you have to do the things that you have control over. And that is strategic planning, that is awareness, and that is outfitting your people so they have more options later rather than less options. And that's where security comes in, is it really helps form a methodology on how you do risk assessment and risk planning. What we've done in the past in some of my other companies is we've done wargaming, where we help executives think through it, because often the person who's in charge of the budget doesn't want to own the risk. You have somebody who's like, I'm leading a VP of sales and we're going to achieve this mission, and then security comes in and says, but you need to and they push back. If you've ever had that experience where somebody is trying to accomplish something but don't want to own the risk, you can relate that it's very, very frustrating. And so as security practitioners, one of the most important things we can do is educate the powers that be on how they can own risk and how they can think about risk.
Yeah, I would, if we're just talking about security professionals, the people that have been using the words vulnerability, threat, and risk forever, and it's just now in the last couple of years that the C-suite's using these words, the people that have been using them for a long time would be well served by empathetically understanding the needs of the business as a whole, and I'll beat this drum to death, providing clarity. Mm-hmm. A security audit, if you were to go through your entire company and just look at the security checklist, is the same checklist as a financial audit, as a business process audit, as a CRM audit.
Yep.
It's the same checklist, because they still want to carry or look through and take note of every asset and every piece of your business. Right. And so if you're trying to add value and to be able to bring these new terms to bear so that the organization as a whole is very familiar with threats and vulnerabilities and risk, you're going to have to speak in such a way that the salespeople invite you to their meeting. And that allows a true security professional to have conversations about the business as a whole.
This thing that confuses most security professionals is they come to a conversation with what they perceive as logical arguments, call to actions that are irrefutable. And because they do not understand where the other side of the table is coming from, they're missing puzzle pieces and their equations come up with the wrong answers. By understanding or having organizational awareness, what's going on in the organization, why the organization is doing what it needs to do, a cybersecurity practitioner or a risk advisor can then bring a more complete picture to the powers that be and have a more accurate conversation. When you stay in a silo and you don't learn about marketing, sales, ops, reporting, finance, you are missing important puzzle pieces that let you advise on risk.
Absolutely.
I would drop the mic, but it's attached to my shirt.